A person buys a house in 1985 for $120,000, sells it in 2025 for $600,000, tells everyone he made $480,000 on that house. His son, who studied finance, pulls out a calculator, does the real math, goes quiet for about 30 seconds. Says, "Dad, after inflation, property taxes, maintenance, insurance, mortgage interest, and opportunity cost, you might have broken even." The father thinks he's joking. He's not. Another couple buys a house in 2019 for $380,000. They take enormous pride in paying down the mortgage. They have $200,000 in equity now. They feel wealthy. Their neighbor rented the same size house the entire time and invested the difference every single month. The renter has $310,000 in a brokerage account. The homeowner has $200,000 in equity they can't access without selling or borrowing against it. Third scenario, a woman refinances her house in 2021 to fund renovations. Kitchen, bathrooms, new deck, adds $80,000 to the mortgage. Her Zillow estimate goes up $60,000. She calls it a smart investment. She just lost $20,000 on paper and feels like she won. What's the pattern? They all believe the same thing, that buying a house is the best investment a regular person can make, that your home is a wealth-building machine, that rent is throwing money away. These beliefs are so deeply embedded in American culture that questioning them feels almost un-American. The real math looks nothing like the story your parents told you, and the psychology is even more distorted than the numbers. Here's what we're actually doing today. I'm going to show you the full hidden cost structure of homeownership that nobody puts in one place. I'll break down why the famous "I made so much on my house" calculation is almost always wrong when you run the honest numbers. I'll show you the 1950s psychological conditioning that created the homeownership belief system and why it made sense then but doesn't automatically apply now. And most importantly, I'll explain why housing can still be the right choice for millions of people, but only when you understand what you're actually buying and what it's actually costing you. This isn't about renting versus owning. It's about knowing which game you're playing instead of assuming you already know. By the way, I built a free retirement and wealth calculator because most of the ones online use assumptions that haven't been accurate for 30 years. It uses real inflation-adjusted data and lets you compare different scenarios honestly. Links in the description. Think of your house like a jar. Every month you put money in. Mortgage payment, property taxes, insurance, maintenance. You watch the jar fill up and feel good. You're building equity. You're being responsible. But what most people don't see is the hole in the bottom of the jar. It's not a dramatic hole. It's small, barely visible. But it never stops draining, and the name of the hole is total cost of ownership. And if you measure what actually comes out over 30 years against what you put in, the math stops looking like an investment and starts looking like an expensive decision that also happened to give you a place to live. That's the reframe we're building today. Housing isn't bad, but it isn't what most people think it is. Let's start with what actually happened in American housing history, because this is where the belief comes from, and understanding the origin tells you everything. After World War II, the United States government made a deliberate political decision. Returning veterans needed stability, a traumatized economy needed an engine, and a government holding enormous military capacity needed to redirect it into domestic production. So Washington created the conditions for mass homeownership. The GI Bill subsidized mortgages. The interstate highway system opened up suburban land. The mortgage interest deduction made buying cheaper than renting for anyone with a decent income. And an entire generation bought houses in their 20s for $12,000 to $20,000 in today equivalent prices that are worth $300,000 to $600,000 5 decades later. That generation told their children, and their children told their children, buy a house as soon as you can. It always goes up. It's the safest investment you can make. And for them, in that specific historical context, they were right. They were buying at the beginning of the greatest government-subsidized real estate expansion in human history. Cheap land, cheap credit, growing population, expanding suburbs, tailwinds that lasted 40 years. Here's the problem. Most of those tailwinds are gone. The land near good jobs is already developed. The interest rate environment that made mortgages historically cheap for a decade has shifted dramatically. Population growth is slowing, and the people who got rich on housing in the post-war era are now selling those houses to people paying 6 and 7% mortgage rates on $500,000 properties in cities where the median income is $75,000. The math that worked for your grandparents doesn't work the same way for you. But the belief transferred without anyone updating the underlying assumptions. That's the trap. Let me show you the real return calculation on housing that almost nobody does. Because this is where comfortable assumptions get destroyed by honest arithmetic. Let's say you buy a house for $400,000 in 2024. You put 20% down, so $80,000. You take a 30-year mortgage at 7% on the remaining $320,000, your monthly mortgage payment is approximately $2,029. Over 30 years, you will pay $777,000 in total mortgage payments on a $320,000 loan. You will pay $447,000 in interest alone. That's not the purchase price, that's just the cost of borrowing. Now, add property taxes. In the United States, the average effective property tax rate is around 1.1% of home value annually. On a $400,000 house, that's $4,400 a year. Over 30 years, as the house appreciates toward $800,000, let's average the tax bill at $6,600 annually. That's $188,000 in property taxes over the life of the mortgage. Insurance. Homeowners insurance on a $400,000 to $800,000 property averages between $1,500 to $500 per year, depending on location and coverage. Call it $2,000 on average. Over 30 years, that's $60,000. Maintenance. The standard rule used by financial planners is 1 to 2% of home value annually for repairs and upkeep. Roof replacement every 20 to 30 years. HVAC systems every 15 years. Water heater every 10 years. Exterior painting, plumbing. Appliances. Landscaping. On a $400,000 to $800,000 house using 1.5% average, you're spending $6,000 to $12,000 a year, averaging around $8,000 a year, averaging around $8,000 annually. Over 30 years, that's $200,000. Let's add it up. Mortgage payments, including interest, $767,000. Property taxes, $198,000. Insurance, $60,000. Maintenance, $240,000. Total spent over 30 years, $1,265,000. And the house is worth $800,000 at the end. You spent $1.265 million on an asset worth $800,000. And that doesn't include closing costs when you bought it, realtor commissions when you sell it, or any renovations you chose to make along the way. Now you might be saying, but I was going to pay rent anyway. That rent money would have disappeared. At least with the house I have something to show at the end, and that's a real and valid point. But here's the comparison most people skip. What if you had rented a comparable property for less, invested the difference, and never bought at all? Let's run it. In many markets, renting an equivalent property costs 30 to 40% less per month than owning once you account for mortgage payments, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Let's say that difference is $1,000 a month, which is conservative in most major cities. $1,000 a month invested in an S&P 500 index fund over 30 years at 7% average annual return computes to $1.22 million. From investing the cost difference alone. Is that a perfect comparison? No. Rents go up over time. The house builds equity you can eventually access. Some markets have dramatically better appreciation than the national average. There are real, non-financial benefits to owning, stability, control, community roots, the ability to customize your space, the feeling of permanence. These things matter deeply. They're real, but they're not investment returns. They're lifestyle and emotional benefits, and they should be categorized separately when you do the honest accounting. The point isn't that renting is always better. The point is that housing, when you do the full honest math, is not the investment most people think it is. It's closer to a hybrid, part consumption, part stability, part savings mechanism, occasionally a genuine wealth builder, but rarely the spectacular investment your uncle describes at Thanksgiving. Here's what actually drives the belief that housing is a great investment. Two things: leverage and inflation. And understanding how they work together explains both why housing feels so good and why the feeling is sometimes misleading. When you buy a $400,000 house with $80,000 down, you're controlling a $400,000 asset with 20% of the capital. If the house goes up 10% to $440,000, you haven't made 10% on your money. You've made 50%. That's the power of leverage. Your $40,000 gain represents a 50% return on your $80,000 down payment. This feels incredible. And it's real. But leverage cuts both ways with the silence of a knife. If the house drops 10% to $360,000, you've lost 50% of your down payment. And you're still paying the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance on an asset that's now worth less than you paid. The math that feels spectacular going up feels catastrophic going down, and most people only tell you the up story. The second driver is inflation. Over time, a dollar is worth less. A house worth $120,000 in 1985 that sells for $600,000 in 2025 looks like a 400% gain, but inflation over those 40 years was substantial. In real purchasing power terms, that $120,000 in 1985 would be roughly $330,000 today. So the real gain, the one that actually buys you more stuff, is closer to $270,000, not $480,000. And that's before all the costs we just talked about. Robert Shiller, the Nobel Prize-winning economist who created the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, has studied real inflation-adjusted returns on housing going back over 100 years. His finding is uncomfortable for real estate bulls. Over the long run, residential real estate has returned roughly 0 to 1% per year in real, inflation-adjusted terms, not per month. Per year, 0 to 1%. The stock market, by comparison, has returned approximately 6 to 7% per year in real terms over similar long periods. That's not a small gap. That's the difference between barely keeping pace with inflation and genuinely building wealth. Now here's the psychological layer, the reason people resist this math even when they understand it intellectually. Homes feel different from stocks. You live in them, you can touch them, you renovate them, argue over paint colors in them, raise children in them. They're tangible in a way that a share of an index fund sitting in a brokerage account simply isn't. When your house goes up in value, you feel wealthy even though you can't access that wealth without selling or borrowing. When your stock portfolio goes up 20%, you check the app, feel okay, and close it. But both represent exactly the same thing on paper. Unrealized gains that don't become real money until you sell. The house just feels more real because you sleep inside it every night. This is called the wealth effect, and it is one of the most powerful behavioral traps in personal finance. People spend more, save less, and take on more risk when their home value rises, even though their actual financial position hasn't changed unless they sell. They open home equity lines of credit to fund vacations. They stop contributing to retirement accounts because the house is the plan. They feel secure in a way that's partially illusory, and often they never sell. They live in the house until they die, leave it to their kids, and the estate eventually liquidates it and splits the proceeds. The equity that felt like wealth spent decades being completely inaccessible. Let me tell you about a guy named Marcus, 47 years old. He and his wife bought a house in 2008 for $310,000 outside Atlanta. They refinanced twice, in 2015 and 2020, pulling out equity both times, once to fund a kitchen remodel, once to consolidate some credit card debt that had crept back to the same level within 3 years. Current mortgage balance, $285,000. Current estimated home value, $510,000. Equity on paper, $225,000. Mortgage rate, 4.1% on the latest refinance. Marcus tells everyone his house is his best investment. And from a narrow perspective, on the surface, it looks that way. But here's what Marcus forgets when he tells that story. He has 22 years left on his mortgage, which means significant principal and interest still to pay. He's put approximately $180,000 into maintenance and improvements since 2008, roof twice, new HVAC, full kitchen, deck replacement, new windows. And the equity isn't liquid. He cannot pay his electric bill with it, cannot cover a medical emergency, cannot invest it without taking out another loan against the same asset and adding to the debt. Meanwhile, Marcus has $72,000 in his 401k. He's 47. He contributes just enough to get the employer match because every time he seriously considers putting more in, something comes up with the house. New roof, $18,000. HVAC unit, $11,000. HVAC unit, $11,000. Bathroom remodeled, $22,000. The house is a gravitational pull on every extra dollar he earns. It's not building wealth. It's consuming the capital that should be building wealth. This is the trap almost nobody names clearly. The house doesn't just cost you money directly in taxes and maintenance. It costs you the investing capital you could have deployed elsewhere. Every dollar going into the house is a dollar not compounding in an index fund at 7% annually, and that displaced capital, invisible on every mortgage statement, is the real long-term cost of homeownership. Contrast Marcus with his college friend David. Rented the entire time, lived in a comfortable apartment. Felt vague social pressure about not building equity, heard the same speeches at family gatherings, smiled politely, and then automated $1,500 a month into a diversified index fund portfolio for 20 years. At 47, David has $890,000 in liquid, diversified investments. He can move cities for a better opportunity without the friction and cost of selling a house. He can take a temporary pay cut for work he loves without panicking about a mortgage. His monthly burn rate is lower because he absorbs no maintenance emergencies. His wealth is accessible. David is not richer because he's smarter. He's not richer because he was lucky with the market. He's richer because the math of his choices compounded differently over 2 decades. And here's the thing Marcus never quite lets himself confront. David can buy a house tomorrow with cash if he decides he wants to. Marcus cannot liquidate his house and invest the proceeds without having nowhere to live. Now, I want to be careful, because I'm not making the argument that everyone should rent forever. That would be wrong and incomplete. There are real and legitimate reasons to buy a home that have nothing to do with investment return calculations. Stability for children in a school district. Fixed monthly costs in retirement when income is fixed. The deep psychological comfort of owning the space you live in. Community roots that compound in ways that don't show up in a brokerage statement, and in specific markets, with specific timing and specific personal circumstances, housing absolutely and genuinely generates wealth. The argument I am making is narrower and more important. You should understand exactly what buying a house gives you and what it costs you, with full honesty. And you should stop believing the cultural script that says it's automatically your best investment because it worked for your parents in a completely different economic era with completely different interest rates, land availability, and market dynamics. The financial industry has enormous incentives to keep the homeownership mythology alive. Mortgage lenders generate origination fees. Real estate agents earn 5 to 6% commissions. Title companies, inspectors, appraisers, home improvement retailers, and property tax assessors all benefit from high home values and frequent transactions. The entire machine, from the bank that approves your loan to the realtor who tells you this is a seller's market, is built to get you into a house, keep you there, get you to upgrade it, refinance it, pull equity out of it, and treat it as a savings account you can never actually withdraw from cleanly. This doesn't make any of those people villains. It's incentives. Their job is to transact. Your job is to build wealth. Those two goals are not always aligned, and the place where they diverge is the honest accounting of what the house actually costs versus what the industry tells you it's worth. Here's the protocol. Here's how I'd actually think through a housing decision if I were doing it from scratch, with everything I know now. First, calculate the true all-in monthly cost of ownership before comparing it to rent. Mortgage principal and interest, monthly property tax, monthly insurance cost, and monthly maintenance budget, which is the annual maintenance estimate divided by 12. Add all four together and compare that number to what it costs to rent a comparable property in the same area. If the total cost of ownership is more than 20 to 30% higher than comparable rent, you are paying a significant premium for ownership. That's your right. But be honest that you're paying for stability and control and permanence, not investment returns. The premium is real. You're just deciding it's worth it for non-financial reasons. Second, protect your investing capacity. Before you buy, determine what your monthly index fund contribution will be after all housing costs are paid. If buying the house drops your monthly investing to near zero, you are trading long-term compounding wealth for a single, largely illiquid asset. That's a choice you can consciously make. The mistake is making it unconsciously, assuming the house will take care of the wealth building so you don't have to invest as aggressively. Third, think in decades on time horizon. Short-term homeownership. Anything under 5 to 7 years almost always destroys value once you factor in 5 to 6% realtor commissions when you sell, closing costs when you bought, and transaction friction throughout. If you're not reasonably confident you'll stay in a place for at least 7 to 10 years, renting is almost always the financially superior choice, period. Fourth, stop counting unrealized equity as accessible wealth. Your home equity is not money. It is a number on a Zillow estimate that requires either selling the house or taking on new debt to access. Real wealth is liquid. Real wealth can be deployed when an opportunity or emergency arrives. Paper wealth locked inside a house you're living in is security, which is valuable, but it is not the same as freedom. Fifth, separate the housing decision from the investment decision and answer each one independently. Ask yourself honestly, if I were guaranteed this house would never go up in value, would I still buy it? If the answer is yes, because you want the stability, the roots, the control, the neighborhood, the school district, buy it. With clear eyes, knowing exactly what you're getting. If the answer is no, you're primarily speculating on appreciation, which is a legitimate strategy in some markets, but call it what it is and understand the risk accordingly. Here are your 3 takeaways from everything we covered today. 1. The returns on housing are not what most people believe. When you run the honest math including all costs, inflation adjustment, and opportunity cost of deployed capital, the investment return on a primary residence is almost always lower than a diversified portfolio of low-cost index funds held over the same period. This does not mean don't buy a house. It means buy one for the right reasons, with accurate expectations about what it will and won't deliver financially. 2. The biggest cost of homeownership isn't the mortgage payment you see every month. It's the investing capital the house permanently consumes. Every dollar pulled toward down payments, property taxes, renovations, and maintenance is a dollar that isn't compounding at 7 to 8% annually in a brokerage account. Over 30 years, that displaced and unconverted capital is the real cost of the house, and it appears nowhere on any mortgage statement you will ever receive. 3. You are not making a mistake by not buying right now. Renting while investing aggressively and rationally is a legitimate, historically supported wealth-building strategy that has left millions of people financially freer than homeownership at the wrong time, in the wrong market, at the wrong price. The goal is not to own a house. The goal is to build a financially durable life. Sometimes a house is the right tool for that. Sometimes it isn't. The only genuinely wrong move is to spend $400,000 or $600,000 based on a cultural story that hasn't been critically examined since the Eisenhower administration. Your parents made the right choice for their specific time, their interest rates, their land prices, and their economic moment. That moment was extraordinary and unrepeatable. The wisdom they passed on was real, but the world it was calibrated for no longer exists in the same form. Honoring their wisdom means understanding what they actually got right and why, not blindly copying the surface behavior without examining whether the underlying conditions still hold. The people I've watched build genuine, lasting wealth through real estate weren't people who believed the cultural myth. They were people who ran the numbers coldly, understood the full cost structure, identified markets with specific structural advantages, bought with long-time horizons, and never confused the house they lived in with a diversified investment portfolio. Do that math. Run the real numbers for your specific market, your specific interest rate, your specific time horizon. Buy with open eyes or don't buy at all. But stop making one of the largest financial decisions of your life based on a story someone else inherited and passed down without checking whether it still applied. A house can be a wonderful thing to own. It just isn't automatically the investment you've been told your entire life that it is. And knowing the difference is worth far more than any down payment.